All right, I'm Dan Persons. I'm kind of wearing two hats today. I'm a sheep producer in Minnesota. We raise 900 to 1,100 ewes, just commercial flock. Here's a part of them going home down the road. And you're going to get kind of a virtual tour of my place. I got lots of slides of how we're doing stuff, and then the second half of it, or mixed in, is about Shearwell products. And Shearwell Data is a company out of the United Kingdom. We specialize in electronic ear tags and software management systems for livestock, sheep and cattle both. We operate around the world, so really big in the United Kingdom with about 60% of the tag sales in the UK. We're into Australia, New Zealand, Brazil, United States, and Canada. This next year they'll sell somewhere around 15 million sheep tags of electronic sheep tags, and then you can put a whole bunch more million on top of that of just visual only. So we're a huge tag company. Everything I have, and if you go over to the booth, everything we do is manufactured and shipped out of the United Kingdom. So we have no warehouse in the US, we've got no supplies here. We rely on FedEx and UPS to do our deliveries, and we're kind of our own manufacturing. So here's sheep going home. EID. So all the ear tags in the sheep that were going down the road have a little tag in their ear like you'll see on the table with a little chip inside of it, about the size of a grain of wild rice is the size of the chip. And so that's the key to that ewe is that little rice-sized chip in her ear tag. It's a passive radio frequency tag. So all of the readers, you'll see different readers, and I should have brought them up here, but just a handheld reader, and there's couple different styles on the table. These passive chips, no batteries in them, so the reader itself sends out a little radio wave, and that radio wave hits the chip in the ear tag, and it excites the chip just a little bit, and it excites it enough to generate some electricity in the chip, which sends back then and powers up the chip and sends a number back out to the reader. So there's no batteries to ever wear out. They're pretty encased, proven technology worldwide, and it's internationally regulated. So these chip numbers are all distributed internationally, and if you buy a USDA chip, it all has to start with an 840, 15-digit chip numbers, and can be tracked back to your farm. If you buy even our manufacturer chip, which is, I call just a generic tag, they can also be tracked back to you if Shearwell releases data. So like if the FBI shows up, we maybe would have to release that we sold you this chip number, and it would get traced back to you. But otherwise, it's regulated. You'll never get two chips the same. No matter which manufacturer you go to, you could buy Allflex tag, Shearwell tag, you will never get two chips the same in the world. All those chip numbers are regulated on that market. So there will be no duplicate chip numbers ever. So the components of an RFID system, you've got the software. It's kind of it all has to revolve around some way to manage data. So you've got some kind of software package for your computer. You've got some kind of a reading system. We sell a stock recorder, we call it. It's basically like UPS and FedEx carry. It's got a keyboard and a touch screen and a reader on it that can actually read the ear tags. And so that data logger does your data entry, is all done through that. And then it links back to the management software on a PC. The third component are the tags themselves, and they can be, in our system, either half duplex or full duplex, which doesn't make any difference to you. It's just the half duplex are much higher read rates. They're a higher quality tag, and you can basically ensure 100% read rate on a half duplex tag, but full duplex not so much. So half duplex are a more expensive chip and more reliable. Fourth component would be some kind of, and this is kind of as you go down the list of, here's where you start, and you got to end up at some place in the bottom. The fourth component would be some kind of a weighing system if you're going to collect data. Because if you're going to go EID, you're going to be collecting data. You're not doing it just to do inventory. Well, some are. We have some Western Range flocks and some Southwest U.S. flocks that they've bought EID, and it's only for inventory management. They need to make sure who went out to that particular ranch's pasture and who came back and who's missing. So they're doing it just for inventory management. But most of you in this room and in the upper Midwest and the people that have bought the system, they're doing it because they want to capture data quickly. And they want to get data quick, and they want it all accurate. So some kind of a weighing system, and I'll show a little bit of that later. And then further down the line and more sophisticated are integrating sorting systems where animals can walk in, tags are read, weights are collected, and gates are automatically opened and closed as the animals walk down a raceway. Here's just a picture inside of our lambing barn. This is like a fourth of the barn, and we're running 1,000 ewes through it. So you can tell things are crammed in pretty tight. Data management software. The software we sell, it's lifetime records. So once you start in the system, you start building pedigrees from wherever you start, but it'll have the lifetime records of all the animals that have been in or are in your flock, are all kept in the system. And it's not just our software, but all of the ones out on the markets are kind of have to have some traits in them. They need to keep lifetime records. They need to have flexible reports where you can query lots of different things off the same data set. And I'll show that a little bit later too. Should I be able to import and export software, or not software, but reports in and out of Excel or in and out of recorders of some kind? I should be able to do extensive data query, because that's what it's all about, is figuring out, being able to pull off tops and bottom ends of animal units. Animals should never leave a database. Like in 6 years, I've deleted one animal off my database because it was actually an animal that was put in there probably at a show like this, and I brought my software up and I entered one that really was never there. It got deleted. Otherwise, everything that's ever happened in the last 6 years is still in that database. So like 13,000 records sitting there in the background, which allows you to query data over long periods of time. Much like NSIP, where you're looking at not just 1 year, you're putting multiple years together to make decisions. We have breeding records, scanning, preg scanning records, and lambing records all tied together on that animal. So if you enter a breeding record, it automatically flows through the software and tells you at scanning for pregnancy when she was bred, and then it tells you in the lambing drug, if she's lambing today, this is the sire of those lambs based on the breeding records 5 months ago. So we try to tie all of the activity that happens to an animal back together again. So when you're in the lambing pens, you don't have stacks of paper to say, okay, she was bred to this ram. It's all in the system. And then for us, all of our medical treatments are tracked. The handheld data, so that was on the PC side of it. And then on the stock recorder side, it'll read the EID tags, but you can also enter manual tags. So if you've got a sheep that's 20 feet away and you can't beep the ear tag in, you can type in a visual tag number and it'll still find the animal. Alphanumeric keyboards, so you got flexibility, and it's not like an old cell phone where it's press the 1 3 times to get the C. This is full alphanumeric keyboards. Stores and retrieves data for all the animals. So it not only tells you you're not just doing what you're doing today with an animal lambing. You can also go back into her record and see a little bit more information about that ewe at the same time. And then links Bluetooth to scales and sorters, so we don't have cables around the barns. So we support two ear tags for every animal, and that's kind of a lie too, because we really can support 3 ear tags for every animal, plus two more identifier fields like pedigree numbers, or in the instance of NSIP, we can save the NSIP animal number for that that animal as well. So what do we record? In the lambing side, and this kind of is right along with what Reed just had on the NSIP. What do you keep for records out with a system like this? Well, on the lambing side, we record all live lambs and all dead lambs that are born. We record traits like mothering ability, milking ability, viability of lambs, and the ease of birth of lambs. We record the breed of those lambs. If you're running multiple breeds within the flock, we record that. And any fostering that takes place, whether it's going to a bottle or whether it's going to another sheep. And then we let the software sort that out. So if a ewe only has a single born, but she took on a foster lamb, she raised twins. And the software sorts that out. And the ewe that had the triplets gets credit for having triplets born, but she doesn't get credit for raising 3 of them. That either got raised by a bottle or another ewe. Weights, birth weights, weaning weights, and finishing weights. And it's really all weights. When we get into the automated scale systems, some of our lambs might have 10 or 12 different weights on them by the time they actually hit the market for the truck. And from those weights then, we can do average daily gains by breed, by sex, by sire lines, by ewe lines or breeds. And then other recordings, preg scanning, grouping animals into management groups, breeding records, so who they're bred to, and when the rams went in, when the rams came, or when they were preg tested out. And then a little bit on wool scoring, but in Shearwell itself, that's probably the place we fall down the most is on wool. It's wasn't important in the UK, and programmers are starting to realize that we want it. They just have to figure out how to build it into the system. Oh, here's just a picture of us. We're shearing feeder lambs. We've got 3 shearers and 2 guys pulling lambs out for them. RFID tags, multiple colors. We're USDA approved for scrapie, which is getting more and more important as we get into larger flocks and we get into RFID, we try to make things simple. So by having our electronic tag be scrapie approved, we've eliminated an ear tag in the sheep. And every time we move that ewe to market or other pastures or other breeders or shows or anything else, we can record it pretty simple through the RFID. We can sell tags in matched pairs. So if you order a set of EID tags, we can go right ahead and produce a set of visual tags that would have the same numbers printed on them and in a different color. They're small, they're lightweight. Retention rates are really, really good. Talking retention rates 95% and up from birth all the way through the life of the lambs. Read rates is essentially 100%. The only tags we've had that quit reading, bucks are bad on ear tags. They smash their heads into everything and they tend to break the chips. So you put up with a little bit of that. But in lamb tags and ewe tags, it's essentially 100% read for the life of the tag. Low cost. Our RFID tags are just a little over $1 a tag right now. So probably the cheapest you're going to find in the market. And like I said before, they're internationally regulated. So you'll never get 2 chips the same. It's just a picture of really a family barn, but a pen of ewe lambs we had for sale. And actually there's 3 pens of them for sale. And so the RFIDs allowed us to keep enough records that we add value to these ewe lambs that we weren't going to keep. But they've got value because there's records behind them, and we can give the new owners some production data back off the ewes. Weighing systems. If you're going to collect a lot of data and you go to RFID on the one side, then when you get to the weighing side, the last thing you want to have to do is start typing in more numbers or writing things down. So the next step is you get readers, and then you go to scale systems that will link to those readers. So you don't have to type things in anymore. My progression on all this, I was intrigued by kind of RFID, and at first it was barcode tags, probably 15 years ago. But our progression on weighing was, the first step was notebook. Somebody read a tag, wrote it down. 15% of the time they wrote it down wrong, or it was read from the U wrong. So when you got to the end, the data didn't make sense anymore. We wrote it on a notebook, tag numbers and weights, and then we entered it into some kind of software, or we just left it on a lamb card, and there it stayed for eternity, which gets to be, with 1,000 ewes, the stack of barn cards were too thick, too much data, and too much time sitting there keying it in. So it literally sat. We have stacks of barn cards that never got looked at again. So that was our first, handwritten. Second step was, and this is, it takes me back a ways, but it was paper tape calculator with a number button on it and a weight, so I could key in the lamb tag number, hit the pound key, and then type a weight and hit plus. And at the end of the day, I had a count of how many lambs we did, and it was written where I could actually read the printing on the tape. That was the second step. Third step was take the computer right to the barn and just key it in as we went down the barn. And the final step was going to an integrated weighing system, where once we went to RFID, it didn't take us long to learn that we wanted to integrate everything and eliminate errors and speed up the process. Here's just a picture of our working chutes on our place. It's pretty simple. It's kind of what you'd call a bud box. There's no real crowd tub. It's just a pen in the front that leads up to the chute. So this is looking backwards through the chute, and there's a pen in the front that leads to the raceway, and then two smaller pens in the back to just keep pushing everybody forward, and then about a 30-foot run. And then at the front of the 30-foot, we put whatever we want in there. Tip table, three-way sort, the automatic drafting crate, whatever we want, we just attach it at the front. Or shearing chutes, we attach it at the front of that 30-foot race. Drafting system, so it's automatic sorting. User-defined draft, you can draft anything you want. You can set up a draft that sorts all the ewe lambs from the ram lambs. Or you can sort off anything that had an average daily gain of less than 0.3 and have it sorted out one gate and the rest of them out the other. Kind of whatever data set you can put your animals into, you can make the drafting crate sort them out. And then not only does it sort it out, but it keeps track of which ones it put out that gate. So at the end of the day, you've got a list of the ones that actually went up the raceway, that fit that criteria, and it puts them in a management group in the software. So you can later go back to that group in your software and pull up who are the dams to all of these lambs that went out to less than 0.2 pounds a day average daily gain. Pull those ewes up and start investigating why they're on the bottom. We can put between 300 and 400 lambs an hour through a drafting crate, and it'll have all their tags recorded, all their weights recorded, and it'll have them sorted out three ways and listed for us on which ones went out which gate. We use it a lot for finishing lambs, and I don't think I've got a slide of it, but we can tighten up our marketing window considerably. Like, we'll put 80 to 85% of our lambs in a yield grade 2 situation on a truck and start hitting grids, and then we'll hit the prime windows for carcass weights. With 75 to 80% of the lambs will hit that prime window for carcass sizes. And this one, we should be able to make a video work. So here's the automatic draft. Get it to stop. So lambs go in. The white panel on the side is reading the ear tag. The scale on the top sends the weight out to the computer. And the computer's telling it to open and close the front and back gates. So nobody's touching anything. It's running off just a little 1.5 gallon air compressor in the background, so it doesn't take much of a compressor to make it work. It's not cheap, but it eliminated one person out of all of our sorting operations for the year. We don't have to have anybody standing up front permanently opening and closing gates, and it works pretty flawlessly for sorting. And like I said, you can set any criteria you want. You can set it for weight so that every lamb that was over 130 pounds went out the right-hand side. And anybody 125 to 130 went out the left, and everybody else goes forward. You can set your criteria on how you want it to run, but it took one person off all the sorting operations. And at the end of the day, not only did that person disappear, but I got all the data off that operation back as well. So, oh, that was a bad key to press. There we go. We'll get it back. Ha! But we got to go all the way back through again. So in the bottom line, how do we use the data we collect? And it fits right in with Reed's presentations. What do you do with it all in the end? And I'd say you kind of got to make this list up before you decide to go RFID. What do you want out of your sheep? Do you want more lambs produced? Do you want better average daily gains? What do you want to change? And then start looking at, once you're in the system, what's the data I need to collect to change what I need to change? So for us, we want to select the poor performing ewes. We want to find out who's that bottom 10% of that bell curve that we all have on every flock. Who's in that bottom 10% that is not contributing anything to my bottom line? They're robbing from the rich to pay the poor. And so we try and get rid of that. The second half of the bell curve is those ewes that are way out there on the top end. They're the cream of the crop. They make all the money on the operation. What are those ewes? And then can we take those ewes and breed them back to really good livestock to make better ewes in the end? And I think that's where, when we look at the NSIP data and you decide we're going to go that route and we're going to buy NSIP bucks, that's all really good and fine. But if you don't know where your flock is to start with, how do you know what level you need to buy in NSIP? Maybe there's a lot of flocks that if they just selected the average of NSIP, they'd be improving their own flock, and they can get that genetics pretty cheap. Or if you're on the high end and you've got a very highly productive flock already, you can't afford to buy the middle line NSIP rams. You're going to be out there buying the very top 5 and 10% of the breed to be able to keep making improvements in your own flock. So we select the top and we select the bottom. The bottom get culled off. They're just sold without looking back. We monitor our death loss, and not just monitor it to find out how many died. We monitor it to find out why they died, and how old were they when they died, and what lambing group did they come from. Are they all January ones that were lambing out when it's 20 below zero and we're going to struggle on death loss on that group? And if so, what do we need to change to make that better? We track our antibiotic use for natural lamb production, average daily gains in finishing lambs to determine time of market. And we've done some trials on the farm. Now that we can actually run data and collect it easy, we can do on-farm trials pretty simple. So whether it's comparing 2 feed companies together, or whether it's comparing one feed ration to another, these kinds of systems make that all possible without really adding much work on your behalf. Culling early for better markets. So when we're going to give our first shots here this next week, we'll have our drafting crate or our handheld all set up, and I'll already have a list of ewes that are going to be culls out of that group of Januaries that will be weaned, and those culls will never see a dry down ration. They're going to go right from that family pen, right to a truck, right to market, skip the loss of weight, and hopefully get them out before that female market crashes too much more. And then selecting replacement ewe lambs, and I already said conducting on-farm trials, which RFID makes it possible. The data collection's simpler. So there's a really nice set of quads. Animal details, here's just a screen of the kind of information, and this I would say is just the base information on a sheep. It's just her tag numbers, when she was born, her sire, her dam, is she pregnant or not, when did she lamb last time. It's just sort of her base information. Here's another shot inside a family barn. Lambing detail, so if we click on a U, it'll tell us every lamb she's ever had in her lifetime, live and dead. And so she's got 9 lambs born, and she was, well, and this is 9 lambs born through 2013, and she's a 06 model ewe. So she's done fairly well. And then here's another shot inside the lambing barn. You know, it was one of these days when the regular jugs were all full, cold outside, really, really cold outside, and all the normal jugs are full. The overflow jugs, this is all we had left for drop pens in the barn, and there's probably, I don't know, there's probably 100 ewes out there yet and outside eating that had to come in, and they came in, we let them out to eat, and it was below zero. We let them in, and they just lined up like airplanes on a runway. They're ready to go. So 2 of them there pushing already, and I'd say it's fun, but you know, when that's all you got left for drop pens, it's maybe not as fun that morning. So we look at tops and bottoms, and I'm kind of getting you to the point of how do you pay for this whole thing. So assessing where we are now in the flock. So I did a 2-year, took the flock and I looked at 2 years of lambings for them. Because we accelerate lamb too. I guess I didn't mention that, but we're accelerated lambers too. So this whole thing of 2 lamb crops in 3 years, and how do you figure all this out, who's good and who's bad, gets really complicated really fast with accelerated lambing. So we're looking at 2 years worth of data, of lambing data, and I excluded ewe lambs off the look. And so we looked at just ewes, and so it came up with a lambing percentage average for the flock of 182% over those 2 years. And the numbers look kind of funky, you know, it's 1,000 dams and 3,000 lambs, and you think, well, that's like 300%, but it doesn't really work out that way because some of them didn't lamb both years, and so it gets funky. Just think of the 182% where it's at when we look at the whole flock. And then we selected out the slackers, and I went down and I said, I want to see just the bottom 5% of the flock. Well, that bottom 5% of the flock was at 128% over those same 2 years. So we have a 60% difference on that bottom to the top. These ewes are losing money. There's no way in our climate, 128% lamb crop, there's no way you make money on them. Absolutely won't happen, right, Alex? No way. It won't work. We need 160, 180. My number's really low. I can sort of make it work, but I do have a second job. So, you know, it's just not good enough. But so we take that 128%. 60 head got to disappear out of those numbers. And then if you take those 60 head out and you look at what's left, we increase the lambing rate from 182 to 185 by getting rid of the bottom 5% of the flock. That's only the bottom 5%. We could probably take the bottom 10% off and increase that just a little more yet. So a 3% increase in lamb drop by doing nothing more and figuring out who's at the top and who's at the bottom. And so here's a performance report. And now you start getting into interesting numbers. It's, again, it's a 2-year deal, so it's really fun to put your top ewes up there. It's not as fun on the bottom ones. But we've got some ewes out there this is their average number of lambs born per year. So you start getting into pretty big numbers because it's accelerated. So some of these girls are 3 lamb crops in those 2 years, and they've had a 5.5 born. But we also have to look at the deads, which Reed said, it doesn't do any good to have lives if there's deads. And so it's got a column here that's not just how many died, but what stage of growth were they in when they died. And I cheated a little bit. I got some Brula genetics floating around in my flock yet. So the twinning gene, if you've heard of that, it's kind of a dangerous gene, especially if you put a Brula on a prolific ewe. It's kind of dangerous. They'll have quads and quints pretty regularly. And absolutely don't want to flush them. That would be awful. Here's shearing 15 below zero. It was really, really cold that morning. So we built a tent inside of the hoop barn and ran heaters underneath and tried to keep our shearers a little bit nicer on a really cold day. But we looked at death loss, and we can take our death losses and start sorting it out by why'd they die. So, and starvation still on our flock, still number one. I think it is nationwide. It's number one killer. And so off the death loss assessment, why'd they die, and what can I change in our management? What do we need to focus on? If we're only losing a couple lambs to pneumonia, is that really where I want to spend all my time working, or is it all in these starvations and figure out what is it the ewe's fault, is it the lamb's fault, is it barn climate, or how fast we're moving them? So some of what you learn once you go RFID is not really what you wanted to hear. I mean, it's some hard lessons maybe, but you have to look at it as all positive for changes. Here's our bum lamb pen, all on raised decking, automatic milk machine, automatic water fountains in the pen, and then there's just a really shallow pit underneath, like a 10-inch deep pit. And it'll hold about 2 years of manure storage out of the bottle lamb barn. So it's an old chicken house, so we just pounded the floor out and poured a couple of shallow pits. But they stay really nice. It smells like a pig barn inside of it, which I don't really like, but it's not ammonia gas. It just smells like pig barn instead. Average daily gains. So start running lambs over scales a lot and collecting lots of data. You can get average daily gains. This one is a birth weight, or a first weight, I should call it. A first weight to whatever final weight it was. And again, it's the top end, and this was actually part of a feeding trial that we did. So this was a final weight out of barn number 1. So then from the weight gains, we can start looking at sires that produce the weight gains, and start looking at from the bottom sires to the top sires. What did their lambs look like when they came through the finishing barns, and what sire lines really perform in finishing and which ones don't, because we still have about 3/4 of our lambs that it's the finishing end of it and the finishing lamb that's generating the money. And none of that looks like really big changes from, 0.7 to 0.84, that's a big change in average daily gain. But when you get up on the top and it's only a 1/100th of a pound difference, it's not much. But I'll show you in a little bit what that means on a dollar amount for you. Here's just a barn of finishing lambs, all sheared out. We've been shearing 100% of our feeder lambs for probably the last 8 years. And we'll shear some pretty big feeder lambs, but when it gets hot in the summer, they keep right on growing, and we might ding our pelt credits a little bit, but we still end up with faster gains and better feed efficiency. Culling, start looking at so this is all the ones that are listed for cull, and I don't know what year, this was printed in 17, but can kind of start looking at why are we getting rid of the ewes we get rid of, and what's happening. Bad bag, bad feet, poor milk, bottom 5% for 3 years in a row, looking at a 3-year production window. And then when I had paper records, we couldn't do any of this. It was 1,000 ewes, paper records, 200 ewes in paper records. You just can't manage that amount of data to make any real sound, big decisions. And then we look at selecting our next generations, looking at ewe lambs by sires. And so if we've got sire lambs that don't perform, then the ewe lambs from that line aren't going to stay in the flock either. There's replacement females out eating. So how do you pay for this? So I'll tell you what it costs, because that's always the question. For the stock recorder and software, you're looking at about $2,150, $2,120. The price kind of does this depending on what the exchange rate is with Great Britain, but it's somewhere in that $2,100 to $2,200 for software and a reader, which gets you started. The tags are essentially $1 a piece, so that's really round numbers. So how do you pay for it? So on 100 ewes, if you can increase your lambing percentage by 1/10 of a lamb per ewe, which isn't really very much when you're starting at 1. To go to 1.1 is not much. But on just 100 ewes, that's 10 extra lambs a year. At $200 a fat lamb is $2,000 in 1 year, if you can just bump it up. And we couldn't get all that 1/10 in 1 year, but if we just lop off the bottom 5% for 2-3 years in a row, we can move ourselves to that by 1/10 of a lamb just by getting rid of the bottoms every year. And on only 100 ewes, you pay basically for the reader, just on an improved lamb crop. And then if you look at average daily gain, and you think, well, if we can increase it by 0.05, get rid of the lines that don't gain weight in the barn, whether it's the ewe's fault or the lamb's fault or the feed's fault, increase that average daily gain by 0.05 a day, which the first time I ran it, I thought, that is nothing. That's not enough average daily gain to even worry about. But over the weight gain of that lamb, it's 12 days of feed. 12 days of feed at 45 cents a day on 150 lambs out of those 100 ewes is another $800 in your pocket. So then for us, it started to get to be real money at 1,000 ewes, add another zero onto all this, and you start to get to be pretty big dollar amounts in the end. I mean, even at 500 ewes, you start to pay for these systems pretty fast. And then we looked at culling these poor performing ewes early. If we can do 10 ewes a year and not lose 20 pounds at dry down, at 60 cents a pound is another $120 for the flock, which isn't that much. If we can change our death rate by just 3%, go from 18% to 15%, it's another $900. And then look at marketing lambs at the right times. Don't sell these lambs that are too light for the market they have to go into or too heavy for the market they have to go into. For the ethnic markets, or I shouldn't say ethnic, the non-traditional markets, they might want an 80-pound lamb. If you send 95-pounders, you wrecked yourself. You could have sold 2 weeks earlier and got better money. And then buying rams that will improve your flock. So, and that's where I said, if you've already got a really high level of production, you can't afford to buy the average anymore. You're way above that. So you've got to buy rams that improve your own flock. So that's kind of how you pay for systems. And you'll notice in none of this did I talk about labor, because I just didn't, but you got to put your own numbers on that. But I can tell you it takes us less time on a stock recorder to enter all of our lambing details than it did to pick up the notebook and write down the ewes ear tag number. It's literally beep, touch the screen, beep, touch the screen, beep, touch the screen, and you walk away from the ewe. There's no number writing, there's no trying to figure out what her tag number is, because she can shake her head at you all you want and she can jiggle her head so you can't read the tag. But if you get the reader close, it's got her tag number. And in the end, I didn't have the same ewe lamb 3 times in 2 weeks because I wrote it down wrong or read the tag wrong. That's all gone too. EID tags, there's no chips the same. So all those little stupid things that we all hit, you're going to sort off a whole pen of ewes or lambs, and You got your beautiful list, and all of a sudden this one comes in the chute, and there's already a check mark by her tag. You think you sorted her out already, and now you have no clue who did you sort and who didn't you sort. So I see people laughing because we've all done it. There's just another shot of ewe lambs. They're probably a week before they were going to go into the lambing barn. They're all sheared up and kind of ready to go. Use it to make a difference. You know, sorting lambs, improve your lamb percentage, keeping only the best and getting rid of all the rest of getting rid of the bottom end of the flocks. Add value to your extras. There's huge demand for ewe lambs right now. It's unbelievable the phone calls you can get if you want to get rid of ewe lambs. Like, not just small quantities, people wanting 10, 20. They'll call up and want 300 ewe lambs, and they want them from one place or two, but they're going to have to kind of just accept they're not going to get it that way. Most of them won't. But huge value in those extra lambs if you've got data behind it that you can show these people that you're representing them properly and fairly. The out-of-season breeding, if you got extras, let me know, because I could sell them all for you. I mean, it's huge demand. Improve the data accuracy and improve sorting efficiencies. Reed talked on some of this already, but what's coming down the track? Probably the biggest one coming that I see is this carcass grading and paying on a carcass. If we all followed the hog industry, 30 years ago when they started paying for hogs based on carcass sizes and fat covers and all that, and I had people I worked with, not through this, but through another job I had, that they couldn't sell their pigs. They did not produce. There wasn't a buyer in the neighborhood that would buy their pigs because they didn't fit the windows. They were stuck. They got rid of them, but they didn't get near the price for their hogs that the people that followed their carcasses and produced what the packers want or produced the market. And I think this is coming pretty fast. Instrument grading's already approved in one of the plant in California. I think by end of summer it'll be in Denver, Colorado. Mountain States is already paying members based on their instrument grading system. So that's coming fast, and believe me, they're going to start looking at every lamb that goes down that rail, and they're going to start tracking where those lambs came from. Even if you don't have an RFID tag, they're going to know that these lambs came from X sales barn or this feedlot or whatever situation it is. And I think it's not going to be long, and we're going to get paid based on our carcass merits. Genetic testing and evaluation. There's a lot of work going on out west right now with genetic testing and genome work that maybe most of you don't hear about, but there's a lot of it going on. Many tens of thousands of lambs now have their genes sorted out and selected, and they're pooling that information together and getting SNP chips on these animals. I think that's coming. NSIP and performance measuring, that's a given. I really can't imagine buying rams without some kind of NSIP numbers on them and knowing that you've got a base of accurate data. Genome enhanced EBVs, I think that's going to come faster than we know. I mean, that was a big topic down in San Antonio in January. They had 3 speakers there in the NSIP room all talking about genome testing and genome linking within the breeds. I think it's going to be huge. When I took this shear well job, and I tell you, I'm just a sheep producer that wanted something different, so I'm really just a sheep producer. And I didn't think the large flocks would buy into it very easy. I figured they're not going to do this data capture, and they're not going to want it. I was really, really wrong. They're embracing all of the above faster than you can think here in the Midwest. They're part of these genome tests. They're part of the NSIP. They're bringing in NSIP genetics, genome testing them, running them through their ewe flock, getting their carcass data back, and taking that carcass information back to their sire lines and back to their ewe lines. They have embraced it. They don't call for 100 tags, they call for thousands of tags at a time. It's just, they're just going to do it. And some of them it's going to take 3 or 4 years, but they'll have their flocks all EID'd, I'm guessing within, the very progressive ones, they're going to be into this and they recognize what's coming down the track. And they're going to be in it with both feet within about 4 years. They're going to be on board. And the last thing is it's getting harder and harder to get lambs harvested at peak times. When all these lambs are coming to market out of the west, it's getting really hard to sell lambs. Just can't, there is rail space for them. They just don't want it all filled. So there's a bunch of our ewes just looking across the feedlot and my dog watching the bottle lambs. He does a great job keeping them in when they're behind a fence.